Welcome back to the broadcast, and remember we are streaming live on YouTube at KUTV Kenya Live and Facebook and on KUTV Kenya, and also feel free to engage us on our social media handles at Twitter, where we are at KUTV_Kenya. And now to the discussion of the day, where attention to gender has never been more urgent, and more so gender equality. Earlier this week, we celebrated the International Women's Day, but with the backdrop of an unfortunate incident of a violent act against a female motorist on our well-designed modern road in the capital in the 21st century. Some may argue that this is no new issue. We have an active war in Europe in this age, but it still does not negate the fact that there is a need to assess the inequality gap and how far we have come ever since the start of the campaign to stem the gender disparity in our country. And to execute our local assessment, I'm joined by Winnie Siomboa, an advocate and journalist for human rights gender lead. Winnie, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
I'm grateful. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and today was the LSK elections. Were you involved?
No, I wasn't.
Oh my goodness. How do we begin this? Anyway, we'll go back to our discussion today. Now, on matters equality, gender equality. Currently in the country, if I'm to come with the topic of gender equality, I kind of remember at a moment in a certain discourse we had where you debunked the idea of men being stronger than women by actually leveling that I could find a woman who's stronger than me. And it brought a sort of double thinking in my mind, and to bring about the fact that as gender, there is a need to have a gender equation that is actually on an equal basis. Now, looking at the country currently, Winnie, how is the equality structure? How are we doing as a country currently?
Well, as a country, I do believe that women are still ranked lower than men. Mm-hmm. Granted, there are certain aspects or spheres of life where we have seen women excel. And we've seen obviously more women coming out to present themselves for leadership positions. We've seen more women coming out and seeking educational opportunities at all levels, starting from primary education all the way through to tertiary education. And I think one of the youngest PhD holders we have in this country is female. Mm-hmm. So there's obviously a marked improvement in terms of the places or spaces that women hold. Mm-hmm. And there's a progressive realization of the advancement of women. Mm-hmm. But when we talk about gender equality as a concept, I think we are still lagging behind as a country. Look at, for instance, one of the spheres that is more pronounced, and that is the sphere of women in leadership. We have gone as far as a country as even putting in place legislation to allow for what you call gender quotas, the 2/3 gender rule. And this is a constitutional provision. And while at the moment, many people look at it as a principle, as a policy that is addressing women's issues, it is actually a policy that is addressing gender equality, and not just that of women, but that of men as well. But we are unable to attain that as a country. We've not even gone as far as putting in place the supporting legislation that is supposed to enable this constitutional provision become actualized. We have women in parliament who are fighting to be heard, whose voices are still stifled. You can imagine parliament, which is the highest position of representation, where women find themselves, sitting alongside men and making decisions that affect this country. But they still have their voices stifled and are not able to articulate most of the issues that they would like to articulate as adequately as they would like to. We have gone to the extent of even having the Chief Justice advise our president on the need to dissolve Parliament because it failed in enacting the 2/3 gender rule, but that hasn't been done. So that tells you that, the things that we are looking at, where we would want to be, our wishes as women in this country, insofar as equality is concerned, have not been realized. And yes, while we're looking at leadership as one aspect, it has a way of, affecting all the other spheres of life, the economies, the cultural aspects of life, our social interactions. All of those are affected by how, the issue of leadership in this country is a reflection of how the other spheres of life look like for women folk in the country.
And you have touched on several litigation measures that were highlighted maybe by even the Chief Justice. Now, looking at these matters and the fact that we actually have a legal framework and all the necessary maybe laws to try and actually ensure there is equality, even from the parliament status, coming down even to the bottom structures of the government and even the private sector. Is it to say that such litigation, such measures are not taking effect, as in has the law in a way lost its bite?
I wouldn't say that the law has lost its bite because, first of all, a legal recognition is the first step towards effectively guaranteeing that the rights and fundamental freedoms that are enshrined in national constitutions like ours and in other international human rights principles are realized. And in our case, we have a robust constitution that has done exactly that. And apart from, the 2/3 gender rule that currently has not gotten its supporting legislation, you find that there are other laws that, guarantee the rights of women in the country. And this is particularly important, especially in societies where women continue to be or can become vulnerable to discrimination, to abuse and exploitation because the legal protections that we expect there to be are not available, or if you find that they override social and traditional practices that are prejudicial to women's equality. So for us, I would say that as a country, we are doing well. We're doing better than most because we have gotten to a point where we have made that recognition. But also, it's important to realize that the law does not act just because it's there, it's written, that there are other supporting institutions that exist. And, I keep telling people that we are very quick to sometimes say, oh, the judiciary has failed. But the question is, if today the Chief Justice witnessed a crime being committed somewhere, do you think she is able to bring this person to court and prosecute them successfully? And I'd say no. And the reason I say no is because the law is structural. It has to be followed. It has to be followed and implemented in a structural way. So we have institutions that support this, implementation. And we have, for example, the police who do investigations. We have the prosecution that brings or prefers charges against somebody, and then the judiciary that hears these matters and determines how culpable one is. And unless all these three organs, among others, work in a concerted effort, we will not be able to realize the full effect of the law. So what I would say is that there's need for these institutions to work together, and those that are weak to be strengthened. Where there's need for capacity building, there's need for that to happen, so that we don't continue to have incidences where we keep saying that we have a robust law and this law is not working. On the other front is also a question of impunity, and impunity here lies with the highest organs of governance, whereby you expect certain laws to be enacted. Again, I go back to the example of the 2/3 gender rule, but it doesn't happen. So impunity and lack of political will, which is a reflection of what society feels about women. Because if there was respect for women, and if our cultures and our cultural practices supported women 100%, then you'd find that acceptance of gender equality is very easy. It's not problematic. and therefore a law like the 2/3 gender rule would become easy to enact. But because we're fighting more structural biases, it becomes difficult. So laws are there, laws are important. There are measures to implement them because, again, if you go to our prisons, nowadays it's said that the largest population in prison is that is serving time for offenses related to sexual violations. We call it the Sexual Offences Act type of crimes. So that to me is an indication that people who commit these crimes eventually do get apprehended, and they go to court and they get arrested. I mean, they get sent to prison. So the law is not necessarily silent on some of these things. Even the case on the rider, the Boda rider, I do believe that it's an ongoing case right now that has been taken up by the authorities, as it were, and it will eventually achieve successful prosecution. So I believe that we do have a place for the law. It might be slow in some instances, but I have faith that it won't lose its bite, and eventually it will promote what we're looking at in terms of achieving gender equality.
We do hope so indeed. And I'm getting a question from social media where there's a guest who's asking a question which will bring us back, but for clarification matters, what is the difference between gender equity and gender equality?
Well, gender equality is where we basically say that, first of all, I think, let me start by defining what gender is. And gender is the socially ascribed roles of men and women. Many people tend to think that gender is man and woman, but that is not so. It is the socially ascribed roles of men and women. For example, we have women being relegated as caregivers and men being relegated as providers. That's the most traditional role you can ever imagine. But now, when we talk about gender equality, we are talking about there being parity between men and women, such that they both can be able to achieve the same things. And gender equity is basically just an extension of that, creating equal platform for both genders to be able to access opportunities, services, and to be able to access opportunities and services at par, creating a level playing field for both genders to be able to achieve opportunities and services at par. So there's not really, when we say we want gender equality, we are not asking women, we are not asking to be equal to men. We are not as in equal to men by saying that we want to be men. No, what we are asking for is that we have equal opportunities, so that if it's a question of, for example, going to school, that a boy child has that opportunity to go to school in a similar manner as a girl child, and that we take away all challenges or barriers that might be able to hinder this girl from going to school. So it doesn't stop at ensuring that there's a school with classrooms and children to go to. You look at the structural challenges, you look at cultural challenges that might affect this two people. For example, with girls, you have things that affect girl child that may not affect a boy child, like menstruation. Can we provide a girl child with the necessary sanitary measures that allow this girl to still continue accessing education, so that we're not saying that she's free to go to school, but on certain days she can't go because she's menstruating and does not have the necessary hygiene items. For the boy child, again, it's structural as well as it is contextual. So if, for instance, you come from, let's say, the conflict-plagued regions, we're not saying that, okay, the boy child is free to go to school, but because we're in conflict, let them go and fight as the girl child goes to school. And then once the fight is over, they'll come and continue with school. No, we're saying that both of them need to be in school, in classroom at the same time, so that whatever is being taught, everyone has access to it, can be able to understand what it is, and compete with each other at a level playing field.
And I'm getting the fact that gender issues cannot just be left to women. They're not the only ones affected. And even more, I'm getting the fact that there is a need for both genders to actually coalesce and try and come together to try and bring the parity around. Now, looking at that from that aspect, what would be your word to those who actually view the idea of trying to bring this parity as oppressive, perhaps, to the boy child?
Well, for me, I would urge them to look at it differently, because that affirmative action is not looking at oppressing the boy child. As you say, we cannot win the gender war if we're just walking alone. Nobody can be able to achieve great lengths by walking alone. We have to walk together in order to help each other. So gender equality has to be achieved by bringing on board all genders, men and women, and looking at the issues that affect each of them critically and honestly. And I say this because there are issues. I mean, when you listen to the proponents of boy child who say that the boy child has been left behind while the girl child has been allowed to thrive, has been allowed to progress at the expense of the boy child. What they're saying is that there are particular issues that are very, they touch directly on the boy child, while they don't touch on the girl child. And an example is given in the northern Kenya, where we say that, for example, FGM is pervasive and affects girls. But then someone comes and says, but at the same time, we have perpetual conflict, and this perpetual conflict affects the boy child. So a girl child will not be given a gun to go and fight. She may have to be married off early, but then the boy child is given a gun to go and fight. So who is talking for this boy child who's constantly asked to stop, growing up as a child and become a child soldier? And I say all of these people are right, that we cannot achieve gender equality by just promoting the girl child while leaving behind the boy child. And neither can we, choose to uphold the boy child and leave behind the girl child. We have to look at the issues that affect both genders critically and honestly, and agree on how to address each of these issues as it pertains them.
And as you finalize, Winnie, should we break this bias that is evidently there? What are the gains for us? And perhaps if we are to avoid or rather play like there is nothing happening, what would be the risk for us?
Well, we have a long way to go in breaking the bias. And I'm happy that, there are good strides that are being made, progressive ways in which advocates of gender equality are progressing towards achieving gender equality, or rather breaking the bias. So you are asking what would happen should we break the bias? Should we break the bias? That would be the ideal world, whereby each person has equal opportunities. And I think at that point, it will be a question of emphasizing on the strengths of each gender, so that we don't also get to a situation where inequalities start existing, because when you have people at par, you might slacken, and with these new challenges will emerge that will probably marginalize one of the said genders. So there has to be constant vigilance onto the gender challenges that might affect either gender. And it's important to note that these challenges are ever emerging. So in yesteryears, for example, terrorism was not an issue, but now it is, and it is directly affecting men more than it is affecting women. So we have to interrogate those emerging issues and look at how we can mitigate them so that inequalities do not continue to thrive. And I guess the second part of your question was about well, should we not achieve it? What should we continue to do? What should we do? And I'd say that we need to continue fighting towards destroying the structural barriers that exist. We have to have concerted efforts at advocating for equality, putting in place measures including legislative and policy frameworks that will promote gender equality. And more importantly, one of the things that is obviously left behind, which I tend to think is one of the most important ingredients in achieving gender equality, is awareness creation, because awareness creation is generally lacking, and it affects how we perceive gender equality. It affects how we perceive gender concerns. Because if you look at, for example, what happened with the border riders and the reactionary measure that was taken by the president and other organs that are charged with dispensing justice, is that people tend to feel that when we react towards an issue such as that, that it's a punitive. Yeah, it's punitive. It's more of you're oppressing one side of the divide while advancing the other side. But the truth is, if there was awareness creation on what gender equality is, and that is at a societal level, because yes, there are people who do understand what gender equality is, and there are people who understand what is right and what is wrong, because the conversations have also oscillated around issues of right and wrong, outside of gender. Well, the thing is, we would have more, respect for each other. And this means that the cultural biases that exist, that continue to perpetuate gender inequalities, would be more known by, people in society. And, when we talk about cultural biases, the conversation does not stop at just pointing out what they are, but pointing out what are these biases and how can we be able to address them or tackle them, so that they stop being impediments to advancement of women, or rather impediments to societal advancement. But, it becomes a conversation of how can everyone participate in safeguarding each other for the advancement of the society, because that is what is more important. So awareness creation has to be a major part of what we do. And with this awareness creation, we also have to cultivate consciousness amongst ourselves on the need to be more vigilant of each other and to be more concerned about the welfare and progress of each other more than pulling each other down. And that would, in my view, help us achieve gender equality faster than where we are at the moment.
Thank you, Winnie. I wouldn't put it better. Awareness, tolerance, and the realization that the journey is not a race against the genders, yes?
Yes, the journey is definitely not a race against the genders.
Indeed.
It
And
is
also,
a walk, and we have to work together.
yeah, and wonderful. And also, I'd like to inform you, breaking news coming through. LSK president is Eric Theory. Eric Theory has taken the helm as the LSK president. Winnie, you're now informed.
Yes, thank you, and congratulations to him.
Thank you for actually creating time for us right here. And we hope we can actually engage you in another moment. Thank you very much.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you. We now take our short break, second break on KUTV Primetime News. Stay tuned. We'll be back with more news.